When a 2,000-pound Angus bull breaks loose during the Millfield Harvest Festival in rural Texas, panic spreads through hundreds of terrified visitors as people scatter in all directions. But 14-year-old Harmony Kemp, who lost her sight in a childhood accident, remains perfectly still in the bull's path. What happens next exposes the truth about the dangerous animal, reveals the extraordinary abilities that blindness has given Harmony, and teaches an entire community that sometimes seeing clearly requires more than just your eyes. Sheriff Lucas Brennan had been working security at the Millfield Harvest Festival for 12 years, and he'd seen just about every kind of trouble a small Texas town could generate. Drunk teenagers, lost children, the occasional fistfight between rival high school football fans, nothing he couldn't handle with a firm word and steady presence. But nothing had prepared him for what happened at 3:47 p.m. on that sweltering Saturday afternoon in October. The Millfield Harvest Festival was the biggest event of the year in Brazos County, drawing over 2,000 people to celebrate the end of cotton season and the beginning of harvest time. Local farmers displayed their prize livestock, families sold homemade goods, and children rode carnival rides that had been coming to Millfield since Lucas was a boy. The trouble started at the livestock exhibition area, where local ranchers showed off their best cattle, pigs, and horses. Jasper Holbrook, who owned the largest ranch in the county, had brought his prize Angus bull, a massive black animal named Captain that weighed over 2,000 pounds and stood nearly 6 feet tall at the shoulder. Captain had been agitated all afternoon. The noise, the crowds, the unfamiliar smells and sounds of the carnival had put the normally docile bull on edge. But Jasper, eager to show off his prized breeding stock to potential buyers, had dismissed concerns from other ranchers about the animal's obvious distress. "That bull's been hand-raised since he was a calf," Jasper told anyone who expressed worry. "Gentle as a lamb with the right handling." But Captain wasn't being handled right, and anyone with experience around livestock could see it. The bull was penned in a space too small for his size, surrounded by noise and chaos that violated every instinct about what made cattle feel safe and secure. 14-year-old Harmony Kemp had been sitting quietly on a hay bale about 30 feet from Captain's pen, listening to the sounds of the festival with the acute attention that comes from navigating the world without sight. She'd lost her vision in a car accident when she was 7, and in the 7 years since, had developed an almost supernatural ability to read situations through sound, smell, and vibration. "Daddy," she said to her father Vernon, who was browsing the equipment displays nearby, "that bull's not angry. He's scared." Vernon Kemp looked toward Captain's pen, seeing what appeared to be a perfectly controlled livestock display. "How can you tell, sweetheart?" "His breathing. The way he's moving in the pen. He's not snorting or pawing like an angry bull. He's making the sounds cattle make when they're frightened and can't find a way to safety." Vernon had learned to trust his daughter's extraordinary perceptiveness. Since losing her sight, Harmony had developed an uncanny ability to read animals, weather patterns, and human emotions through senses the rest of them barely used. But before he could investigate her concerns, disaster struck. A group of teenagers showing off for their girlfriends had climbed onto the fence around Captain's pen and begun making loud noises and waving their arms to get the bull's attention. One boy threw an empty soda can that struck Captain in the head, and another started shouting and clapping his hands directly in the animal's face. The combination of fear, noise, and perceived threats finally overwhelmed Captain's tolerance. With a bellow that could be heard across the entire festival grounds, the massive bull charged directly through the wooden fence, splintering boards like toothpicks and sending the teenagers diving for safety. Panic erupted instantly. Hundreds of people began screaming and running in all directions as Captain, now more terrified than ever by the chaos he'd created, charged through the festival grounds, looking for an escape route that didn't exist. Children were separated from parents in the stampede. Elderly festival goers were knocked down by panicking crowds. Carnival rides stopped mid-cycle as operators shut down equipment to prevent injuries. The carefully organized celebration became a scene of absolute chaos in less than 30 seconds. Sheriff Brennan immediately radioed for backup and began trying to coordinate an evacuation, but the situation was rapidly spiraling beyond anyone's ability to control. Captain weighed over a ton, was running on pure adrenaline and terror, and was trapped in an area surrounded by hundreds of people with nowhere to go. "Get everyone back!" Brennan shouted through his bullhorn. "Clear the area! Do not approach the animal!" But in the middle of the chaos, one person remained perfectly still. Harmony Kemp sat exactly where she'd been when the crisis began, 30 feet from the destroyed pen, directly in Captain's path as he charged through the festival grounds. While everyone else ran screaming in panic, the blind 14-year-old remained calm and motionless, her head tilted slightly as she listened to something only she could hear. "Harmony!" Vernon shouted from behind an overturned food booth where he'd taken cover. "Get out of there! Run!" But Harmony didn't move. She sat on the hay bale with perfect stillness, her sightless eyes turned toward the approaching bull, her expression showing no fear, only deep concentration and understanding. Captain charged to within 10 feet of where Harmony sat, then suddenly stopped. The massive bull stood trembling with exhaustion and terror, foam around his mouth, his eyes wild with the kind of panic that makes large animals extremely dangerous. For a moment that seemed to stretch forever, girl and bull regarded each other across a distance that could be covered in 2 steps. The entire festival had gone silent, except for Captain's labored breathing and the sound of Harmony's calm, steady voice. "Easy, boy," she said softly, her words carrying clearly across the sudden quiet. "I know you're scared. I know you just want to go home." What happened next would be talked about in Brazos County for the rest of everyone's lives, and would teach an entire community that sometimes the clearest vision comes from those who cannot see at all. If you're enjoying this story, like this video and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss our stories. Captain stood frozen 10 feet from Harmony, his massive chest heaving with exhaustion and terror. Around them, the festival grounds had gone completely silent, except for the distant sound of carnival music that someone had forgotten to turn off. Hundreds of people watched in breathless horror as a blind teenage girl faced down a panicked 2,000-pound bull with nothing but her voice and an inexplicable calm. Sheriff Brennan had his hand on his service weapon, knowing he might have to make a terrible choice to save Harmony's life. But something in the girl's posture, the complete absence of fear, the way she held herself with quiet confidence, made him hesitate. "Nobody move," Brennan whispered into his radio. "Nobody make a sound." Harmony continued speaking to Captain in that same soft, steady voice that seemed to cut through the bull's panic like a lifeline. "I know how scary it is when you can't find your way," she said, still not moving from the hay bale. "When everything's loud and confusing and you don't understand what people want from you. But you're not lost, boy. You just need someone to help you remember where you belong." Vernon Kemp watched his daughter with a mixture of terror and amazement. Since losing her sight 7 years earlier, Harmony had developed abilities that sometimes seemed almost supernatural. She could predict weather changes by feeling atmospheric pressure, identify people by the sound of their breathing, and calm frightened animals with an intuitive understanding that went far beyond normal human perception. But this was different. This was his child facing down a terrified animal that could kill her without even meaning to. Captain took a step closer to Harmony, his eyes still wild but showing the first signs of confusion rather than pure panic. The bull's breathing began to slow slightly as Harmony's voice continued its gentle, hypnotic rhythm. "That's right," she said, extending one hand very slowly toward the massive animal. "You're not a mean bull. You're just scared and tired and want to go back to your pasture where it's quiet and safe." Dr. Patricia Valdez, the festival's volunteer veterinarian, had been watching the crisis unfold from behind the medical tent. She'd seen plenty of livestock emergencies in her 25 years of practice, but she'd never witnessed anything like what was happening between this blind girl and the panicked bull. "How is she doing that?" whispered Dale Henderson, the festival coordinator who'd been crouched beside Dr. Valdez since the chaos began. "I don't know," Dr. Valdez replied, her voice filled with professional amazement. "But look at the bull's body language. His ears are forward instead of back, his tail's stopped lashing, and his breathing is slowing down. Somehow she's actually calming him." Captain took another step toward Harmony, close enough now that she could have reached out and touched his massive head. The bull's panic was gradually being replaced by confusion and something that looked almost like curiosity. "People think I'm different because I can't see," Harmony continued, her voice never wavering. "But you know what? Sometimes not seeing with your eyes helps you see with your heart. And my heart tells me you're not dangerous. You're just misunderstood." Around the festival grounds, people were beginning to realize they were witnessing something extraordinary. Parents lifted children onto their shoulders for a better view. Teenagers stopped texting and started paying attention. Even the carnival workers had come out of their hiding places to watch the impossible scene unfolding in the livestock area. Jasper Holbrook, Captain's owner, was making his way carefully through the crowd, carrying a lead rope and looking like a man who'd aged 10 years in the past 10 minutes. "That's my bull," he whispered to Sheriff Brennan. "Captain's never hurt anyone in his life, but he gets spooked in crowds. I should never have brought him to the festival. Can you get control of him?" "I don't know. He's never been this panicked before. But that little girl, how is she keeping him calm?" Captain was now close enough to Harmony that his breath ruffled her hair. The massive bull lowered his head until it was level with hers, and for a moment that took everyone's breath away, girl and animal seemed to be communicating in a language that had nothing to do with words. "I can hear your heart beating," Harmony said softly, slowly raising her hand to touch Captain's muzzle. "It's slowing down now. You're remembering that most people are kind, aren't you? That the scary noise and confusion isn't meant to hurt you." The moment Harmony's fingers made contact with Captain's nose, a visible change came over the massive bull. His ears relaxed completely, his tail stopped swishing, and he let out a long, shuddering breath that seemed to release all the fear and tension he'd been carrying. Dr. Valdez found herself holding her own breath as she watched the interaction. "In 30 years of veterinary practice, I've never seen anything like this. She's using some kind of natural animal therapy that veterinary schools don't teach." Harmony began stroking Captain's massive head with the same gentle confidence she might use to pet a friendly dog. "There you go, boy. You just needed someone to understand that you weren't trying to scare anyone. You were scared too, weren't you?" Captain responded by lowering his head even further, actually nuzzling against Harmony's shoulder in a gesture of trust that brought tears to dozens of watching eyes. Jasper Holbrook saw his opportunity and began moving slowly toward them, the lead rope ready but not wanting to disturb whatever magic was happening between his bull and the remarkable girl. "Harmony," he called softly. "My name is Jasper, and Captain belongs to me. You've done something amazing, sweetheart. Do you think you can help me get him back to safety?" "He wants to go home," Harmony replied without turning away from Captain, "but he's worried that people will still be angry at him for being scared." "Nobody's angry at him," Jasper said, close enough now to clip the lead rope to Captain's halter. "And thanks to you, nobody got hurt. You saved lives today, young lady." As Jasper led Captain away from the festival grounds toward the safety of a quiet pasture, Harmony remained sitting on the hay bale, listening to the sounds of normalcy slowly returning to the festival. Parents called for children, carnival rides began operating again, and the buzz of conversation replaced the earlier silence. But something fundamental had changed in Millfield that afternoon. A blind 14-year-old girl had demonstrated courage and wisdom that put every sighted adult to shame, and in doing so, had taught an entire community that seeing clearly has nothing to do with your eyes. Sheriff Brennan approached Harmony with the kind of respect usually reserved for much older, more experienced people. "Miss Kemp, what you did today was the bravest thing I've ever witnessed. How did you know that bull wouldn't hurt you?" Harmony smiled, tilting her head in the direction where Captain's hoofbeats were fading into the distance. "Sheriff, I've been scared and confused plenty of times since I lost my sight. I know what it sounds like when someone's heart is breaking from fear. Captain wasn't angry. He was just lost and needed someone to help him find his way home." The profound simplicity of her answer left the veteran law enforcement officer speechless, but it was nothing compared to what the community would discover about Harmony Kemp in the days that followed. Her moment of courage with Captain was just the beginning of a story that would change how everyone thought about disability, wisdom, and the extraordinary gifts that sometimes come disguised as limitations. 3 days after the festival incident, Harmony Kemp found herself at the center of attention she'd never wanted or expected. News crews from Austin and Houston had descended on Millfield, wanting to interview the blind girl who tamed the bull, while social media posts about her courage had been shared thousands of times across Texas. But for Harmony, the real story wasn't about her moment with Captain. It was about what she'd been trying to tell people for months that nobody had been willing to hear. Dr. Patricia Valdez knocked on the door of the Kemp family's modest farmhouse Tuesday morning, carrying a veterinary bag and wearing the expression of someone who'd been losing sleep over unanswered questions. "Harmony, I wonder if we could talk about what happened at the festival, she said, as Vernon invited her into their living room. As a veterinarian, I'm trying to understand how you knew Captain wasn't dangerous when everyone else was terrified. Because I'd been trying to tell people for weeks that something was wrong with how he was being treated, Harmony replied, settling into her favorite chair by the window where she could feel the morning sun on her face. But nobody wanted to listen to a blind kid's opinion about livestock. Vernon looked confused. Sweetheart, when did you have contact with Jasper's bull before the festival? Every Tuesday when we drive past the Holbrook Ranch on the way to my therapy appointments in Bryan. Captain's pasture is right next to the road, and for the past month I could hear him calling out every time we passed by. Dr. Valdez leaned forward with professional interest. What kind of calling? Not angry bellowing like people thought at the festival. Lonely calling. Distress calling. The kind of sounds cattle make when they're isolated or in pain. Harmony, how could you tell the difference from inside a moving car? Dr. Valdez, when you can't see, you learn to hear things other people miss. Animals have different voices for different feelings, just like people do. Captain wasn't making aggressive sounds. He was making sounds that said he was hurting and confused and needed help. Vernon felt a familiar mixture of amazement and concern for his daughter's unusual abilities. Since losing her sight, Harmony had developed perceptiveness that sometimes worried him because it set her apart from other teenagers in ways that weren't always comfortable. Harmony, why didn't you tell me about Captain's distress calls? I tried, Daddy. Remember last month when we drove past and I asked if we could stop to check on the bull in the roadside pasture? You said we were running late for my appointment. The memory hit Vernon like a physical blow. He dismissed his daughter's concern as childish curiosity, never imagining she was identifying a serious animal welfare problem that would eventually endanger hundreds of people. Dr. Valdez was taking notes with the intensity of someone solving an important puzzle. Harmony, what else did you notice about Captain's situation? His water source was too far from where he spent most of his time. I could hear the difference in his movement patterns. Short, shuffling steps instead of normal cattle walking, and his calls always got more desperate around the same times of day. Which times? Mid-morning and late afternoon, the times when cattle naturally want to drink and graze, but something was preventing him from doing it comfortably. Dr. Valdez set down her pen and looked at Vernon with growing amazement. Mr. Kemp, your daughter just described classic symptoms of chronic hoof problems that would make normal movement painful. That would explain why Captain was so agitated at the festival. He's probably been in discomfort for weeks. Are you saying Harmony diagnosed a medical condition in an animal she'd never seen, just by listening to him from the road? I'm saying your daughter has natural diagnostic abilities that most veterinarians would envy. She identified behavioral patterns that indicated health problems, predicted that the animal would react badly to stressful situations, and somehow knew instinctively how to calm him during a crisis. That afternoon, Dr. Valdez drove to the Holbrook Ranch with Vernon and Harmony to examine Captain more thoroughly. What she found confirmed every detail of Harmony's remote diagnosis. Captain was suffering from chronic laminitis, a painful hoof condition that made walking difficult and explained his reluctance to move around his pasture normally. The condition had gone undiagnosed because Jasper, despite being an experienced rancher, had attributed the bull's decreased activity to laziness rather than pain. How long do you think he's been suffering? Vernon asked as Dr. Valdez examined Captain's hooves. Based on the severity, probably 6 to 8 weeks, which matches exactly with when Harmony started noticing his distress calls. Jasper Holbrook, who had insisted on being present during the examination, looked stricken as he realized his prize bull had been in pain for months without his knowledge. Dr. Valdez, I've been raising cattle for 35 years. How did I miss something this obvious? Because you were looking with your eyes instead of listening with your heart, Harmony said gently. Captain couldn't tell you where it hurt, so he had to show you by changing how he moved and sounded. But people get busy and stop paying attention to those kinds of messages. The profound wisdom in her words left all three adults momentarily speechless. As Dr. Valdez began treating Captain's condition, she made a proposal that would change Harmony's life in ways none of them could have anticipated. Harmony, have you ever considered studying animal behavior or veterinary science? What you did at the festival, and what you've just demonstrated here represents abilities that could help countless animals and their owners. I've thought about it, but most people think a blind person can't work with large animals safely. Most people are wrong, Doctor, Valdez replied firmly. You've just proven that some of the most important diagnostic skills have nothing to do with sight. You heard things I missed, identified problems I overlooked, and calmed an animal that I would have been afraid to approach. Vernon felt his heart swell with pride and possibility as he watched his daughter's face light up with hope for a future she'd never dared to imagine. Dr. Valdez, what are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that Harmony could revolutionize how we think about animal care. She could teach veterinarians and animal behaviorists to use senses we've been ignoring. She could help identify problems before they become emergencies. As they drove home that evening, Harmony was quieter than usual, processing the day's revelations and possibilities. Daddy, she said finally, do you think other people would believe that someone who can't see could actually help animals better than people who can? After what happened at the festival and what we learned today, I think people are ready to believe that seeing isn't always the most important sense, even if it means I'd be different from other veterinarians. Harmony, you've been different your whole life, and that difference has turned out to be your greatest strength. Today proved that what makes you different makes you extraordinary, but neither Harmony nor Vernon realized that their conversation was being overheard by someone who would soon offer Harmony an opportunity that would test everything they thought they knew about her abilities and her future. The girl who had seen Captain's pain without using her eyes was about to discover that her unique gifts could change the lives of animals and people far beyond the borders of Brazos County, Texas. 2 weeks after the festival incident, Harmony was practicing Braille in her bedroom when she heard an unfamiliar car pull into their gravel driveway. The engine sounded expensive, different from the pickup trucks and farm vehicles that usually visited their rural property. Harmony, we have visitors, Vernon called from the living room, his voice carrying a mixture of curiosity and nervousness that immediately put her on alert. When Harmony entered the room, she could tell from the way footsteps moved across their hardwood floors that 2 people had arrived. One with the confident stride of someone accustomed to making important decisions, the other with the lighter, more measured steps of someone who spent time around animals. Miss Kemp, my name is Dr. Elizabeth Cartwright, and I'm the director of the Texas Agricultural University's Animal Behavior Research Center, said a woman's voice that carried authority and intelligence. This is my colleague, Dr. James Fletcher, our head of veterinary diagnostic training. We've driven down from College Station specifically to meet you, Dr. Fletcher added, his voice showing the kind of genuine respect that Harmony had rarely heard from adults when discussing her abilities. Doctor, Cartwright settled into the chair Vernon offered, her movement suggesting someone who was comfortable in any environment. Harmony, we've been following the news coverage of what happened at your festival, but more importantly, we've been talking with Dr. Valdez about your diagnostic abilities with Captain. She told us what you accomplished, identifying a medical condition in an animal you'd never examined, predicting behavioral problems, and demonstrating calming techniques that worked better than any trained professional could have managed, Dr. Fletcher continued. Vernon sat forward in his chair, his parental protective instincts engaged. What exactly are you folks proposing? We'd like to invite Harmony to participate in a research study that could revolutionize animal behavioral diagnosis, Dr. Cartwright explained. We want to test whether her abilities can be replicated, taught, and applied to help animals across Texas. Harmony felt her heart rate increase with excitement and apprehension. What kind of research study? We have a facility with 50 animals, horses, cattle, sheep, and goats, with various undiagnosed health and behavioral issues. We'd like to see if you can identify problems that our trained veterinarians have missed, using only your auditory and sensory abilities. You want me to diagnose sick animals just by listening to them? We want to discover if your natural abilities represent a breakthrough in animal care that could be taught to veterinary professionals worldwide, Dr. Fletcher said. Harmony, what you did with Captain wasn't luck or coincidence. It was a diagnostic skill that could save thousands of animals from unnecessary suffering. Vernon looked between his daughter and the researchers, seeing possibilities and dangers in equal measure. This sounds like it could be a wonderful opportunity, but Harmony's only 14. She's still in high school. The study would be conducted during summer break, with full educational credit through our university extension program, Dr. Cartwright assured him. Harmony would work with our top veterinarians and animal behaviorists, learning formal techniques to complement her natural abilities. And if the research proves what we suspect, Dr. Fletcher added, we'd like to offer Harmony a full scholarship to study veterinary medicine at Texas A&M with a specialization in animal behavioral diagnosis. The room went silent, except for the sound of Harmony's slightly accelerated breathing as she processed the magnitude of what was being offered. Dr. Cartwright, people have been telling me my whole life that blind people can't work safely with large animals. Why do you think I could succeed where others assume I'd fail? Because you've already succeeded where sighted professionals failed, Dr. Cartwright replied simply. You identified Captain's condition when experienced ranchers missed it. You predicted his behavioral crisis when everyone else was surprised by it. You calmed him when trained animal handlers would have been afraid to approach. The question isn't whether you can work with large animals, Dr. Fletcher added. The question is whether we can learn from your methods to help animals that conventional diagnostics are failing. Harmony turned toward her father, her expression showing the careful consideration she'd learned to apply to important decisions. Daddy, what do you think? Vernon looked at his daughter, the girl who'd learned to navigate the world through courage and intuition, who'd turned the loss of her sight into the development of extraordinary abilities, and realized this moment had been building since the day she'd first started translating sounds and sensations the rest of them couldn't interpret. Sweetheart, I think you've been preparing for this opportunity your whole life, even if we didn't realize it. But what if I fail? What if my abilities with Captain were just lucky guesses? Dr. Cartwright leaned forward, her voice carrying the conviction of someone who'd spent decades studying animal behavior. Harmony, luck doesn't explain why you knew Captain was in pain. Luck doesn't explain why you understood his behavioral patterns. And luck certainly doesn't explain why a terrified 2,000-pound bull trusted you enough to let you calm him during a crisis. What you have is a gift that could change veterinary medicine, Dr. Fletcher added. The only question is whether you're willing to develop that gift into something that could help animals across the country. That evening, after the researchers had left with promises to send detailed information about the summer program, Harmony sat on their front porch listening to the familiar sounds of their rural Texas evening. Cattle lowing in distant pastures, horses moving through nearby fields, the rustle of wind through corn stalks. Daddy, do you really think I could become a veterinarian? Vernon joined her on the porch swing they'd installed after her accident, designed to give her a place to experience their farm through sound and sensation. Harmony, I've watched you develop abilities that amaze everyone who meets you. You've turned what doctors called a disability into a superpower that saved hundreds of lives at that festival. If anyone can revolutionize animal care, it's you. But I'm scared. What if I'm not as special as these professors think I am? Then you'll be a perfectly normal person who happens to be blind and wants to help animals. But I don't think that's what's going to happen. As they sat in comfortable silence, Harmony made a decision that would determine not just her own future, but the future of animal care across America. She was going to accept Dr. Cartwright's challenge, develop her abilities, and see if a blind 14-year-old from rural Texas could indeed teach the veterinary world how to hear what they'd been missing. The girl who had stood still while everyone else ran was about to discover just how far courage and extraordinary abilities could take someone who refused to be limited by other people's assumptions about what was possible. 3 years after that life-changing summer at Texas Agricultural University, 17-year-old Harmony Kemp stood before an audience of 500 veterinarians, animal behaviorists, and agricultural researchers at the National Conference on Animal Diagnostics in Dallas. What had begun as a research study to test one blind girl's unusual abilities had evolved into a revolutionary new field called sensory animal diagnostics. Dr. Elizabeth Cartwright introduced Harmony with the pride of a mentor who had witnessed something extraordinary unfold. Ladies and gentlemen, 3 years ago, we thought we were studying an anomaly. Today, we're announcing the establishment of the Harmony Kemp Institute for Sensory Animal Diagnostics, which has successfully trained over 200 veterinary professionals in techniques that have improved diagnostic accuracy by 40% across participating clinics. The research results had exceeded everyone's wildest expectations. During that first summer study, Harmony had correctly identified undiagnosed conditions in 47 of the 50 test animals, including cases that had stumped experienced veterinarians for months. More importantly, she'd been able to teach her methods to others, proving that her abilities could be learned and replicated. What we discovered, Dr. Fletcher explained to the conference audience, is that Miss Kemp wasn't just naturally gifted. She had developed a systematic approach to animal diagnosis using auditory, tactile, and olfactory senses that veterinary medicine had largely ignored. The Harmony method, as it had become known, involved teaching veterinary professionals to spend the first 15 minutes with each animal in complete silence, listening to breathing patterns, movement sounds, and vocalizations that revealed information conventional examinations missed. Harmony stepped up to the podium with the confidence of someone who had spent 3 years proving that blindness was not a limitation, but a different way of experiencing the world that sometimes provided clearer vision than sight. When I was 7 years old and lost my sight in a car accident, doctors told my parents I would face limitations for the rest of my life, she began, her voice carrying clearly through the packed conference center. They were right, but not in the way they thought. The audience was completely silent, hanging on every word from the young woman who had become a legend in veterinary circles. My limitation was that I couldn't see animals the way other people did. I couldn't see their size or color or breed characteristics. Instead, I had to learn to hear their pain, feel their fear, and understand their needs through senses that most people have but rarely use. She gestured toward a large screen showing statistics from clinics using the Harmony method. In the past 3 years, veterinarians trained in sensory diagnostics have identified over 1,200 previously undiagnosed conditions in animals whose owners had given up hope. We've prevented countless emergency situations by recognizing early warning signs that traditional examinations missed. Dr. Patricia Valdez, who had become Harmony's first professional mentor, joined her on stage to share specific case studies that demonstrated the method's effectiveness. Last month, a horse trainer in Oklahoma used Harmony's techniques to identify early-stage colic in a racehorse that showed no visible symptoms. Traditional examination found nothing wrong, but sensory diagnosis detected subtle changes in breathing and movement that indicated internal distress. That horse's life was saved because someone had learned to listen with the same attention Harmony brought to Captain 3 years ago. The conference had attracted international attention, with veterinary professionals from Canada, Australia, and the United Kingdom presenting their own results from implementing the Harmony method in their practices. But perhaps the most meaningful validation came from Jasper Holbrook, who had driven up from Millfield to see how far the girl who saved his bull had taken her extraordinary abilities. "Folks, I'm just an old cattle rancher, but I want to tell you something," Jasper said when invited to speak. "Before Harmony opened my eyes, I thought I knew everything about raising livestock. I'd been doing it for 35 years. But that little girl taught me that I'd been looking at my animals instead of really seeing them." He gestured toward Harmony with obvious affection and respect. "Captain's not just healthy now, he's the calmest, most content bull I've ever owned, because Harmony taught me how to listen to what he was trying to tell me all along." The conference concluded with the announcement that Harmony had been accepted to Texas A&M's veterinary school with a full scholarship, where she would begin developing the world's first formal curriculum in sensory animal diagnostics. But for Harmony, the real measure of success wasn't academic recognition or professional acclaim. It was the knowledge that her response to losing her sight had become a way to prevent other beings from suffering in silence. 6 months later, Harmony returned to Millfield for the annual Harvest Festival, now held every year on the anniversary of her encounter with Captain. The festival had become a celebration not just of the harvest, but of the extraordinary things that could happen when communities learned to see past their assumptions about limitation and possibility. Captain, now fully recovered and healthier than he'd ever been, was once again displayed at the livestock exhibition. But this time, his pen was properly sized, positioned away from excessive noise, and monitored by volunteers trained in the Harmony method who could recognize early signs of animal distress. "You know what I learned from all this?" Harmony told the crowd gathered around Captain's pen, gently stroking the massive bull who had started her journey toward discovering her life's purpose. "When that bull charged through the festival 3 years ago, everyone saw a dangerous animal out of control. But Captain wasn't the problem. He was trying to tell us what the problem was." She paused, listening to the sounds of the festival around them. Children laughing, families talking, music playing at a volume that no longer overwhelmed the livestock displays. Sometimes the most important messages come from those who can't speak our language. Sometimes the clearest vision comes from those who can't see with their eyes. And sometimes the greatest courage comes from standing still and listening when everyone else is running away. As the sun set over Brazos County, painting the Texas sky in brilliant colors that Harmony could feel but not see, she reflected on the journey that had brought her from a terrified 7-year-old losing her sight to a young woman whose blindness had become the foundation for helping others see more clearly. Captain grazed peacefully in his properly designed pen, no longer calling out in distress because someone had finally learned to understand his language. And Harmony prepared for a future where her unique gifts would continue opening eyes, saving lives, and proving that sometimes the most extraordinary abilities come disguised as limitations. The girl who had stood still while everyone else ran had become the woman who was teaching the world to stop, listen, and see with their hearts instead of just their eyes. The legacy that began with one blind girl's courage during a moment of crisis had evolved into a movement that would change animal care forever, proving that sometimes the most powerful vision comes from those brave enough to see the world differently.